more activity and more leads. And like what I know to be unequivocally true over 20 years of selling and leading sales teams and now working with sales teams to build their strategy is that like more is not a strategy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cold to Close, the show about what actually happens between a cold touch and a closed deal. I'm Jeremy Schiff, CEO of SalesBot, and I talk to people building real pipeline today, founders, revenue leaders, and go-to-market operators. Today, I'm joined by Leslie Venetz, B2B sales strategist, author of Profit Generating Pipeline, and founder of the Sales-Led Go-to-Market Agency. Leslie's made over 250,000 cold calls, and now it helps teams rethink how they approach outbound, ICP, and pipeline. Leslie helps outbound B2B sales organizations build profitable sales strategies. Leslie, really excited to have you on.
Same. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation because I think we speak a bit of the same language about how to get somebody from cold to closed.
Love it. So yeah, I mean, I gave you sort of a quick overview of a bio, but do you mind just sort of for our audience giving sort of 30 seconds background about like who you are and sort of what you're passionate about?
Yeah, well, I spent a career as an individual contributor, front line, second line, third line sales leader, everything from the very like transactional 2K one call close to six-figure plus, year plus sales cycles. I actually had a bit of a non-traditional start because I started in professional services and only came to SaaS later in my career, which I think gives me a unique perspective because I haven't only sold in recurring revenue models. But yeah, I've done a lot of work with a lot of different ICP personas at different price points with different types of products and different lengths of sales cycles, which informs a lot of my thinking and my approach now.
Really exciting. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the first thing I learned when I started moving into sales is like the people who are used to targeting SMB and enterprise are very different people, and the sort of the approaches to how they do it are very different. So it's very interesting that you have that breadth. You've got a pretty unique model as a sales strategist, not quite consulting, not quite fractional. How did you land on that, and what kind of problems are you typically solving today?
Yeah, I landed on my current strategy, which is more of a done with you advisory model, because I just don't think playbooks work. And this is probably going to get me in hot water, but I think a lot of the times I would go so far as to say that like the way many people are selling playbooks is dishonest because they know that they're selling something that is just going to sit on a shelf and never get used because they're just like dragging and dropping a generic strategy into an organization without figuring out if it's the right strategy or building the processes that support it or like enabling and empowering the team to execute on it. So full disclosure, I was selling playbooks ages ago when I started my company, and I was just pouring my heart and soul into them. And then I was following up with clients and they just weren't seeing the results. So I started asking myself really tough questions about how I can do this most important work of like, sharing the knowledge to elevate the profession of sales, but in a way where I felt significantly more confident that clients were going to get the ROI that they deserve. And that's how I transitioned to the done with you model, which is more of a like, teach a man to fish kind of philosophy.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Very interesting. So you mentioned most of your work happens with companies that are like 50 to 500 million when we were sort of talking earlier. What's different about how those teams approach outbound versus sort of smaller teams?
Yeah, we were joking last time we spoke that I'd just done a bunch of work building new case studies, and one of my takeaways was that my most impactful work happens between the 50 to 500 million range. And I was
Yep.
like, okay, but I need to like drink the champagne I'm trying to sell and maybe niche down a little bit. But for right now, I think that's a good working number because I can still draw some assumptions. Two things that I see a lot, Jeremy. One is for an organization to have grown that big, it means they've made some mistakes along the way. And it means they've like built up their tech stack. So what I realized that I found really frustrating is organizations that had what they believed was like the way to solve something. And because they hadn't failed enough, like they hadn't kind of taken enough lumps,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, they weren't ready to have I think they sometimes earlier stage organizations, not all of them, but many of them have a much more static approach to their thinking about outbound because they just haven't tried and failed enough ways yet. So I like working with slightly more mature organizations just in terms of their willingness to try new things and also like their tech stack, and they often have somebody in house that does rev ops for them. Those are all things that I find important to successful engagements. And the other thing that I look for in those organizations is they are going through some sort of big market shift. So, like, they're going through rapid acquisition. They are like all, hands on board for their next funding round and have a specific date for that. They are launching a brand new product to market or launching in a new market. So, there is something like really significant happening that they cannot afford to get wrong.
Makes sense. It also seems like an opportunity, right? Because if I have a catalyst like that, it's an opportunity to be like, hey guys, we need to go and band together to accomplish X. We need to think differently because if we do the same sort of thing, we're not going to get there on its own. So it also seems like a good way of like driving, like there's always sort of good excuses for bringing people on board, whether it's a new milestone or a new leader or something like that. But yeah, it makes sense that sort of
For sure.
the orgs will be a little more malleable in those sort of situations.
Yeah, they're a little bit bigger. And I also think that when there's some sort of big market shift happening, that they are more inclined to admit that what got them here probably will not get them there, get them to their next set of goals. So I think, like, even reflecting on how I maybe would react to that situation as a former sales leader, I think it allows us to like drop the zone of resistance or drop the ego a bit and be like, okay, I've never done this before. It'd be really nice to have some external support, some external perspective.
For sure. Makes sense. One thing you brought up is that I think really interesting is the idea that like most teams aren't actually doing enough like segmentation or aren't doing it properly. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, I see a couple of things happening. One, unfortunately, is that I actually am seeing teams kind of go backward in that they maybe had a pretty clear SOM or like what marketing might describe as their general ICP, and that's what they were focused on. But now that we have the ability to use technology, to use these LLMs to scale, right? To like send out thousands of messages to thousands of people. I'm watching teams actually expand to their SAM, even to their TAM. And it's atrocious because what they are doing, they're spamming, like they're not sending sales
Yeah,
outreach.
for sure.
So unfortunately, that's one thing that I'm seeing some of this new technology enable is sort of a reversion to like the very worst techniques that salespeople sometimes fall victim to. But more specifically, even when I start working with an organization that does have a pretty clear SOM, like all of the accounts that are in their CRM are generally pretty solid fits for what marketing and product has defined as their broader ICP. But still, Jeremy, I then find that they try to write sales messaging that fits every single account.
Yeah.
And that, like, you and I both know that that doesn't work. And so, what I teach them is to build further segmentation into that SOM, into that territory. So, I call those ICP segments. And then that allows us to make some much more educated assumptions about the things that are most important to those accounts, to those personas. So, we can write what I call value based or like segment specific value props. And clearly, when you are talking to somebody and it really feels like you're talking to them and about the outcomes that matter most to them, that type of messaging is going to earn attention faster and more often.
Yeah, it makes sense. Actually, something we've been sort of playing with is we've been hearing a lot of customers that it's not even just like the account-based segmentation, but like the messaging for different personas in the buying committee should be different, right? Like the way you're going to talk to your champion versus an influencer versus the technical validator are all going to be like really different. And if you use the same messaging, it'll resonate for the champion and no one else. And so, very interesting.
Yeah. One of the
Um,
big like aha moments that teams often have when I'm coming in and I'm workshopping this with them is I will find some emails that they're sending that are like finance executives like you, people in the business space like you.
yeah,
And then we'll have a conversation about like at this specific account, how would you say that the, like manager of operations is thinking about the same problem differently than, say, the chief operations officer?
Right.
And it's this moment where you can see the light bulb go off because nobody's ever asked them to think about how a different persona, even in the same business unit in the same account, would approach a problem differently. So I totally agree with you there.
Totally makes sense. So how do you actually think about like TAM and breaking it into usable segments with reps?
Yeah, well, I love to use an analogy about like all of the fish in the ocean when I'm working with teams. And so if I think about TAM, it's like the entire ocean. And then if I think about SAM, it is, maybe the ocean that we actually have the resources broadly to fish. But when I think about SOM, our sales obtainable market, it is the part of that ocean that we have the resources to fish that also have the hungriest fish. So I like to share that analogy because I think often, and I've done this in my career as well, so this is not throwing shade, but I think often when times get tough, when our pipeline looks thin, when we don't feel like we have enough leads, we have this tendency to default to like more activity and more leads. And like what I know to be unequivocally the team thinking about, okay, looking at my territory, how can I chunk out pieces of my territory where those hungriest fish are? Those people that for one reason or another, maybe it's signal based, maybe it's general like persona trends or account trends, are most likely to be interested in a conversation, to buy now, to buy at the highest price points, to buy fastest. And that's a really great place to get the conversation started.
Yeah, totally makes sense. You also mentioned that like territory management was like the biggest problem people are looking for help with right now. Why do you think that is? And like, what
Yeah,
are
isn't that
people
so
doing wrong?
interesting? Yeah, so I did a like LinkedIn poll at the end of last year because I was just sort of curious what type of content people were most interested in. And
Sure.
I would have assumed that the top thing would have been sales messaging because I just feel like, in our LinkedIn echo chamber, that's the type of content I'm seeing people put out most. And certainly I put out a lot of that content as well. But I heard back from a ton of reps, a ton of individual contributors that they are being told to like own their territory, manage their territory, like have a point of view on their accounts, but nobody's actually teaching them how to do that. So they're being told to do
Yeah.
something and then they're not being enabled to do it. So I think part of it is that they're trying to self-teach and fill in the pieces. And I think part of it too is, man, like as somebody that's made 250,000 plus cold calls, like my teams have made over 10 million, I know what it feels like to just be like banging the phone all day and not getting results, like not having any of those conversations convert to meetings. So I think there is an appetite for reps to figure out how they can increase their efficiency and increase their conversion rates, and territory management is certainly a strategy to get there.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And yeah, I mean, all the time, right? People are like, hey, go and execute on this thing, go work it out. And again, it's not just the sort of strategy, but it's also the tools to go and actually enable this so that they actually know how to like actually execute on that day to day.
100%.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, it's actually really interesting. So yeah, dovetailing here. A lot of what we see in teams is that they're so focused on fixing their messaging or activity when the issue is really just like targeting, like we were just talking about. How do you think about like targeting, segmentation, messaging, and like which really can have the most impact and like where, I mean, you touched on this a little already, but like where you really want teams to be investing to like go and see the sort of outsized returns you're hoping to sort of get for them?
Yeah, great question. Like so many different ideas just sprung into my mind. I think first I'll start with one of the like frustrations that I see, that I experience and I see teams experience, is that their like emails aren't working, or like their outbound
Yep.
generally isn't working.
Sure.
And then they will focus on this like one little piece of minutia in this whole big strategy. And I'll see it often with like obsessing over just a call opener or obsessing over just a subject line. And you see, like, I have genuinely, I'm thinking of a specific rep that was spending like, I don't know, a couple hours every single week, just like brainstorming new subject lines, but it never mattered what new subject line they were trying because their open rates weren't converting to click throughs or replies because they were saying the wrong thing to the wrong people.
Yeah.
So like that is such a I feel for folks when they are kind of finding themselves in that trap, like that quicksand where they're like, I'm trying so hard to like figure out the small little tweaks I can make to get results, but they are often missing the bigger picture, which is they need to
Yeah.
take a step back. But like the actual writing of the messaging and the sequences, if I look at my 9-step proven formula, which is what I outline in my book, Profit Generating Pipeline, that's 5 out of 9 steps. That's 5. So before
Yep.
that, we need to write those segment specific value props. But to do that, we need to identify what our segments are. But to do
Sure.
that, we need to understand what our SOM is, and we need to be able to go from, TAM to SAM to SOM. So there's so many steps that happen before we're actually deciding what type of copy to write on what channels and how we're building it into a sequence that's going to get us the replies and the results that we want to have in our pipeline.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's very interesting for us. We'll see sort of something similar where people are going and tweaking things, and like effectively they're it's going to affect like 1% of the difference between like a terrible subject line and a great subject line is like maybe a couple percent, but people see on LinkedIn, et cetera, of like, oh, all I did was tweak this. I used AI to personalize this subject line, and now I've 3x my click through rates or whatever. I feel like it's doing a real disservice to the market. And yeah, I totally agree that like if you're targeting the wrong people, it doesn't really matter what you say, right?
Yeah, there's so much work that needs to be done before those like incremental improvements in a subject line or in your, CTR or whatever it is, actually are the right thing to spend your time and energy and resources on.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Um, so what do you think teams are doing today that they think is working in outbound that actually isn't? And again, feel free to just sort of expand on the themes we've been talking about.
I have an unpopular opinion on this one. The thing that I think teams believe is working, but the data absolutely shows isn't, is contact level hyper personalization.
Mm.
And that always sounds like, hey, I see you're the founder at. Congrats on your new job. Congrats on your Series A. So it is some like random pieces of information. Or I've seen some that are like very weird. There's one that I always think of that was like somebody was on their personal social media and they saw that they went and swam with dolphins in Hawaii, and they were like, how was your trip swimming with dolphins in Hawaii?
Oh,
Like,
that's awkward.
what? And so what happens is, just like we were saying, these reps are told to personalize, but nobody's teaching
But
them
not
how to
how to
do it
personalize.
effectively.
Yeah,
Totally. So they're going and they're scraping like either inappropriately personal details or totally meaningless details from social media, because nobody you're reaching out to needs you to read the news back to them. They know what their job title is. They know they just got a raise. They know they raised a round of funding. They don't need you to tell them that. And
sure.
then the worst part of it, Jeremy, is that they do that contact level personalization. And then the very next sentence is, anyway, our widget is, anyway,
Right.
right? It pivots immediately into this very like product centric, seller centric language. And so that, like, I see that as a huge misstep because folks are like, personalization doesn't work. And it's not that personalization doesn't work. It is that like that disingenuous, irrelevant
Oh, for
personalization doesn't
sure.
work. And it certainly doesn't work when the next sentence in your email is something completely unrelated to the opening line.
Yeah, we have a running joke at our company, which is the only thing worse than no personalization is bad personalization, because it like actually can come across as less authentic, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of like you walk up to a dinner party and you're like, hey, I heard about this wonderful thing. So do you want to buy my widget? And like if you did that in practice, someone would throw the drink in your face. They'd be like, what are you actually doing?
For sure. Oh,
And
it
yet somehow we
erodes
do it in
trust.
email. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it sort of nukes trust. Like
Yeah.
it goes from like it's the opposite of rapport building. It's like a rapport destruction or something.
Yeah.
So thank you. We've really gone through a lot of like very interesting topics. Where can people learn more or follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they want to check out the book and maybe buy a copy for themselves, their team, the best place to do that is sales ledgtm.com/book. So they can get the book there. That's also my website, sales@gtm. And then I'm a chronically online human. So I'm on most social media just under my name, which is Leslie Venetz. LinkedIn is my primary. I post there every single day, at least once a day.
Well, thank you so much. That's a wrap for Cold to Closed. Big thanks to Leslie Venetz for sharing how she thinks about outbound ICP and all these things that are actually working right now. If you got something out of this, please share this with your team and follow along for more conversations. See you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.